So this episode of Charging the Agency Frontier, I'm introducing Miles Marmo from Agency Squid. We're going to talk today about his agency and how he approaches agency growth and sales marketing, business development, some of the challenges of being an agency owner in 2018. But before we get started, tell me about yourself, your life maybe before becoming an agency owner.
Sure. So, I started off in the agency world. Unfortunately, I was a product of the recession. So that's when I graduated college and decided it was kind of a matter of necessity, finding something that fit interest, but also, employed me. And I started at a digital agency startup in Minneapolis and fell in love with the industry itself and just kind of continued on from there. After the agency startup that I was in, I went to a more creative branding agency where I helped build out their digital team and their digital practice. And then, quite honestly, my fiance was relocated to Chicago, and we didn't want to do distance. So I figured, what better time to leave Minneapolis than now? Ended up in Chicago and had some offers on the agency side and on the brand side, and ended up working for about 3.5 years at Mike's Hard Lemonade, managing their creative and media teams. So I've been on both sides of the spectrum, get a pretty good understanding of how agencies work and how they operate. But I also thought that having the brand experience was going to be really, really necessary if I wanted to start my own thing, which has always honestly been where my mindset has been. However, starting something without that education was quite honestly a fear of mine. So I knew that I had to take certain steps to be able to get that knowledge before I went off and created something.
How did you start? How'd you take the leap?
Honestly, I had the idea for Squid in the back of my head, not necessarily the name. That's a different story. But I knew that creative services could be used to reinforce what businesses actually needed in terms of growth. And I had been on agencies and managed agencies that I just didn't think did a very good job of aligning their creative strategy with the business drivers that needed to happen. So that was kind of the crux of where Squid came from, was understanding communication channels and consumer trends and framing up how creative gets manifested within that becomes more impactful for the brands themselves. So the tipping point at Mike's was I had been there for 3 years. I got brought in to shift their entire advertising strategy to digital, which was the first time I had ever heard of a CPG company actually taking that risk. So I was like, okay, well, great. If we're successful, then that's awesome. And if not, I learn a lot. And we had some really good success with it to then integrate more traditional strategies after we saw some good growth over the few years. So after that, I was like, brand side's great, but it's so specific and you just kind of get in the weeds on one type of industry. And I'm a millennial, so my mind goes a million different places all the time. And the need to be around other industries is really kind of what pushed me over the edge to start Squid.
Gotcha. And you have a business partner or partnership?
Yep. Business partner. So I'm the digital branch of Squid. I have a business partner who's been in the agency world for 30, 40 years on the traditional side. And the two of us heading up the agency, I think, give us a really good balance of traditional and digital and how the two integrate with one another. And quite honestly, I could have started a digital agency and we could have built websites, done social media or whatever, but I think communication is so complicated this day and age, with so many different types of people in the marketplace and brands having to communicate with them in different ways. So that integration piece becomes really, really crucial. And having his expertise around the table gives me at least a unique perspective, and I think vice versa, me being around. And we don't step on each other's toes because we have different disciplines. So that happens to benefit us pretty well. And and also, the cross-generational thing, me being a millennial and him being a baby boomer. We have an interesting story and an interesting perspective. And I actually think, having worked with him now for a couple of years, there are a lot more similarities than differences in the two generations, which I think is interesting that the focus has always been, yeah.
So I can relate. It's interesting. We actually see eye to eye on so many things that I think people would think we wouldn't, but we do. But there's still a level of wisdom that he brings that is really valuable to the partnership. So I can definitely relate.
Yeah, I think it's necessary, and we all should be working together, right? It makes more sense for bringing different expertises around the table to help strengthen these communication needs, and those perspectives that I certainly don't have, that he has, make me stronger as a marketer, and as an advertising person. I need those perspectives to keep myself in check. So, and I would hope that he would say the same thing, but I'm not going to speak for him.
Yeah. So what size are you as far as an agency? I think you started in what, 2014, about 4 years old.
Yeah, 2015. This is year 3 for us.
Okay.
We're still on very much the small side because as agency owners now, the two of us actually have been in a lot of conversations. We also have this advisory group that has helped us with some positioning over the last year and a half. We're looking at growth and what those growth strategies are, because quite frankly, I think that the old agency model is dying. I think we're all seeing it. The way that people staff up with creative services, I don't necessarily think is the way of the future. And so for us, we're trying to figure out what that sustainability is. From a size perspective, we're at about 10 people now. We're built largely with the strategy component at its core, with the freelancer and contractor network that we leverage, which is where kind of that business consultancy model comes in for us, where we use subject matter experts around the table based on the problems that we get brought into. So the growth strategy for us has been really interesting. It's at this key point right now in year 3 where we're like, okay, well, how do we staff up that continues to make our service offerings different than who we compete against? And it's been an interesting journey. And actually, this conversation ends up being interesting because we're like right in the crux of these decisions as we're looking at growth. So we've had really good growth. It's just we don't want to grow something that it already, like the writings on the wall for bigger agencies, that they're dying out. So we're very conscious of how we staff, how we approach new business, how we create this recurring revenue, and what we think of is a different model for our industry.
Gotcha. How much time and or money do you think you spend on sales, marketing, biz dev, positioning, messaging, your collateral, your website, all of the above?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you wanted to equate time to money, it'd be a lot, because we do a lot of that internally whenever we have downtime, which is primarily my side. If we're looking at, tangible funds that we're spending, whether it's doing outreach with people like Bull and Beard, or we've had a lot more of a focus on PR currently from our agency. I'd say at least this year we're probably closer in the ballpark of $10,000 spent on outreach. From a timing perspective, we had just gone through an iterative phase for Squid about 9 months ago, where we had enough information from our current clients and past clients where we had to do some self-reflection on, okay, well, what made them choose us versus the other agencies that we're competing against, and what made us different. Because quite frankly, when we launched our first site and all of our collateral, it was to win a client. It wasn't necessarily out of necessity. So we looked at that and changed our positioning a little bit, changed some of the copy and messaging that we had, and we wanted to be really specific to those marketers.
Did you actually survey your clients, or have questions? I mean, go through that process as getting interviews?
Yep, we surveyed our clients. Both clients that we have now, clients that we've lost, who are more than happy to tell us why we lost them. But that's good. We need, quite honestly, we learn more from the clients that were like, yeah, well, we went in another direction than the ones who are like, yeah, they're great. So we surveyed them. And then, like I said, we have an advisory group that we lean on. It's structured similarly to a board of directors. But for us, we have personalities around the table that go from brand management to sales to the old school McKinsey business consulting models. All these people around the table that.
Is this something you assembled or kind of got involved with?
Say what? One more time.
You assembled or got involved with?
It's something that we assembled. We knew that this was going to be a need for us moving forward. We need different personalities around the table that provided.
I was going to say other small agencies do something similar. I mean, you've got lots of good voices there as far as wisdom and clarity.
Yeah, and I think that's helped us. That we get so in the weeds. I'm sure you know this too, as a business owner. Having perspectives that can give us a 10,000-foot view and tell us what the market looks like in different industries has helped us shift faster. So we actually went through that. Like I said, we went through this strategy session by pulling in this advisory group and doing a 3-day strategy workshop with them on, what the benefits of Squid can be going forward. What do we currently have now? What do we need to bring up to parity? Where our weaknesses, and that kind of formulated the new site, the new marketing materials that we've used. And like I said, our focus on PR now, something that we haven't done very well, is getting our story out there.
For you?
We're just starting, and actually it's been a lot more successful when we've been pitching our story than I had thought. Granted, it's local.
Story, are you using a publicist, or how are you going about it?
We're using a PR, a publicist, and someone that has actually worked closely with us as we brought her in on certain projects that have needed a publicist, depending on some of the strategies that we work with. And since we've honed in our story now, she's been out pitching our story locally. Nothing nationally yet. I mean, we're still small. I don't anticipate us to land anything nationally. This is just part of where we're at. But from a trade publication standpoint, that's not really our focus. We're looking specifically at, business journals and people that would be hiring us. That we're getting very tailored in our approach and looking at those editors that would be interested in, marketing or creative services for their readers. So that's been the next phase focus. But, we've also looked at professional organizations and networks. I'm part of the Advertising Federation board here in Minnesota. We feel really strongly about being a part of that community at large, so that we get a better understanding of not only the talent that's out there, but also how agencies are positioning themselves, how they're making themselves different. And Minnesota as a market, we have over 200 agencies, which I don't think a lot of people necessarily know about. We're actually a pretty big creative community. So understanding, who we're competing against and how we can better position ourselves in that regard, might as well just throw myself in there and get a better understanding of that.
Gotcha. Do you think agency owners pay enough attention to fellow agency owners, not only as competition, but as sources of wisdom and clarity, inspiration? And we've got the stable close to 200 members now, and it seems like there's a fair amount of questions that agency principals have, and there are other principals have the answers to. I've gone through those problems before, and it feels like it was more of a territorial kind of industry than it is, or what I'm seeing on some of these groups where there seems to be a pretty good knowledge exchange. How much value have you seen from networking with other agency owners, agency principals, kind of getting their perspectives on issues versus maybe that time spent on business development, working on your next client?
Right. I actually see a lot of value in it. The stable, even though there are days that I'm more active than others, it's nice to get perspectives from agency owners that maybe specialize in something that we don't. And I think we all go through growing pains, and those growing pains are similar. Having insight into how people are dealing with that or have dealt with that is really helpful because it helps our learning curve as a young agency. Um, the people that I've connected, at least within our community here in Minneapolis, have been either young agency owners that specifically they specialize in something, whether it be social media, whether it be web development. Um, I don't see a lot of agencies that have popped up with young agency owners that are specializing in specifically creative services or media. It is very much on the digital side, but that also just can be because of my background and where my network is. But their growing pains are similar to ours in how they've seen great growth at the start, but are now trying to figure out what do the next 5 years look like, or what do they look like for them? And do they grow outside of their current capabilities of, front and back end development? And do they tap into the creative side, which would then, make them susceptible to larger agencies in town? It's an interesting fluctuation for small agency owners at this point, especially in some really, some really specific creative communities that have had some strong growth over the last few years. I mean, I know that you see this industry in and of itself is going through some interesting changes. And I think that the smaller agencies have a better view of how to manage that than the bigger agencies are. So, and I know this is a long-winded answer to your question, but the smaller agencies are more apt to change. And so I've been relying on small agency owners and their experience more than I have large agency owners that have built something up over the last 15 years and are trying to navigate that. Because I think that the growing pains are different in that regard, but we're all kind of going through them. Yet the smaller agencies are the ones that are taking the bigger risks that are actually paying off.
Yeah, gotcha. So how do you see, if I can ask kind of a more specific question around sales and outreach? You mentioned a lot of work around positioning, and I think, you probably agree that positioning is probably the most important thing to focus on from an agency perspective. But you talked about positioning, you talked about PR, you talked about time spent on outreach. What kind of outreach sales activities do you do? Do you handle that as an agency owner? Do you delegate that to somebody else? Are you looking to build a sales team? Do you feel like those efforts tend to work as far as lead generation and prospecting and some of the sales side of the business?
Yeah, we do have business development help. However, I am an entrepreneur. My co-founder is an entrepreneur, and unfortunately, we're both in the mindset that nobody tells the story better than us, and that kind of waters down our time, and it's not well spent. Something that we're working on, the two of us, is like, we have to trust that other people can tell our story just as well as we can, thus the PR efforts. In terms of the actual outreach, so obviously everybody's looking for lead gen. Everybody wants inbound leads versus outbound leads. It's something that actually I focus on as an agency owner and work alongside our business development person in that regard. For our strategies, my background being
because you do this as an agency owner for, I would imagine for your clients as well, being business focused. Do you feel like it's more challenging in the agency world than other industries? I mean, do you feel like it is one of the more challenging industries to kind of crack when it comes to sales and outreach?
I do. And I think it's because the agencies in the past have not done a good job of helping brands. And so we have a negative connotation that surrounds our industry, to be honest. I think that there have been a lot of
macro thing.
Yeah. I think it's been because agencies through the recession, I mean, granted, this is all hypotheses, right? I have no data to back this up. This is just
That's why we're here, hypotheses.
Yeah. I think that when you look at like agencies through the recession and trying to do almost like a cash grab of nearsighted thinking, we have done so much to burn bridges that we're all now trying to do, like, the smaller agencies that have started up are now competing with the negative connotation that larger agencies have created.
Yeah.
And because of that, it makes prospecting a lot more difficult, because although I'm doing outreach to brands that I either really like or we have industry experience in, because we just want to do good work. We want to work with good people and do good work. At the end of the day, I'm still selling, right? I'm still selling my agency. And if anybody has a bad taste in their mouth from an agency perspective, like, that's an uphill battle that I then have to change their mindset as to, we're a different agency, our approach is different. We're not like the big guys, but yet in large, from a positioning standpoint, again, we all kind of say the same thing, which is why we went through that brand exercises. Okay, well, if we all use the same terminology, we all use integrated marketing or digital, or.
You think that's the trick, is changing the language, changing the vernacular?
I think it's part of it. I mean, when you look at, we do a lot of, I'm a big believer in human-centric design. And although I would love to say that we use, we've whipped out our thesaurus and found all these other words that help people identify with what we do and how we do it. In all actuality, I mean, we still have to use that same vernacular, but in a more careful manner. It's part of the reason why our website is structured in a way where we bury creative on purpose, and we've turned all of our creative stories, once you get there, into case studies, because I believe largely that creative is subjective. All of this can be driven very much by data, and if we can educate the decision maker as to, like, here's our process and how we got there, it may not be creative that you align with, but at least you can respect the fact that we took all this information and turned it into creative output. Those are the type of people that we're trying to align with from a business standpoint. So, like I said, it's a take that we have on how do we differentiate ourselves, because we don't want to be in the game where we're competing with other agencies on creative alone. We know that there are other agencies that have more resources than we do. But I think that our thinking is different in the way that we take data and insights and transform that into some creative output, gives us a competitive edge when we're going against other agencies. But at the same time, there's still an educational component, and the touch points become.
How do you go about that? I mean, that educational component, if you're having that first call or that first conversation, or you have a LinkedIn email or request or something with, a target customer or prospect that you've got work that aligns with them, they look like an ideal client. How do you start that conversation? Because, it sounds a little bit like, there's some defensiveness around the industry and agency reputation and kind of what they're expecting. And how do you break that expectation, or at least get in long enough to break that expectation and have that conversation about maybe something different or looking at it a different way? What's your approach to
Right. Yeah. So I can't say that this is any different than what other agencies do, but before we do any outreach, I mean, within our CRM, myself and our business development manager are taking pretty diligent notes on what the brands that we're doing outreach to have done in the past, and trying to at least offer some sort of guidance and perspective that we have within our initial outreach that says, hey, notice that you guys went this route. Have you thought about this, this, and this, that kind of bring the whole story together? Offering something that they may have missed or some. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask you as well, what are the dangers of growing too quickly, and focusing on growth, focusing on positioning, focusing on PR? We've talked about outreach. We've talked about a lot of different things today. Is there a point where you're growing too quickly, where you're putting too much fuel on the fire? Do you worry about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, that fear comes more from a culture than it is from a business side. We want to make sure that we're bringing in business and clients and projects that get our everybody around the table excited to work on. I feel like as soon as you start growing too quickly, you then start to sacrifice the types of clients that you're working with, and it just kind of turns into the perfect storm of, well, you need the money, and then it looks like short-sighted thinking where you just need to fill the pipeline. For us, we just don't want to create an atmosphere where we're delivering work that we're not proud of. We don't want to be giving projects to our team that they're not passionate about. And those are kind of the drivers that, like, okay, well, if we can create inbound leads and pick and choose the clients that we work with, I mean, that's the ideal situation that we're all looking for, right? Growth would be great. I hope that we're not super greedy, because we'd obviously like to get paid for it and be comfortable. But if we can create an atmosphere where our clients are really proud of the work that we're doing and helping them succeed, and allowing our staff to express themselves, and I think that's our end goal. So too much growth makes it difficult to navigate those waters. It turns into a completely different issue.
Awesome. I have two more questions. The first one, any parting advice for other agency owners, maybe of a similar agency size, 10, 15 people that are smaller in size, that are looking to kind of level up, take it to the next level? Any advice for them that you found in your journey that you'd want to relay?
Yeah, two pieces that I think are really important. The first, don't be afraid to talk about your successes. There are a lot of people, at least this may just be a Minnesota nice thing, but we don't talk about the work that we do or how we've helped, or we're certainly proud of it, but shy about it. And I think agencies that are able to express that without being arrogant will have larger success in finding other like-minded clients and people that want to work for them. That's why we're focusing on that now. That was the first, 2 years of us realizing we do not do a good job of that. And I think we do some good work. So that's number one. The second is really, for smaller agencies, really vet the people that are around the table. We've had some good successes and some bad failures on having the right and wrong people around. I wish that if hindsight, as we look at partners, we took a more diligent approach in finding who was actually a like-minded fit that offered something different. Whether it's personality trait tests, I know that there was some conversation like that in the stable, but that's something that we're really conscious of. Those missteps have hurt some of our client relationships, and it's personality, it's not work. So being really, really cautious about who you bring in and making sure that they are the right fit without jumping the gun just because you need a service or something right away. So that due diligence, I think, is really important to just been a key part in our success and some of our setbacks.
And last question, any mistakes that you've made since you started, any big mistakes on the growth side, or when it comes to your agency positioning, or a press release going awry, or I don't know what it is, anything that you wish you could go back and change?
No, honestly, no. I have no regrets. Missteps and steps forward have all helped with our growth. I think that if it would have been nothing but rainbows and butterflies, I would be living in a very sad world. You have to be level-headed. You have to remove your ego, and there are days, sometimes even weeks, where you're just like, shit, I absolutely hate this. But then there are other days that I wouldn't want to do anything else. So I think that balance is important in running a business. I think it keeps everybody honest. But yeah, to answer your question, I think my missteps as a young agency owner that's never gone through this before, has helped me grow at a more rapid pace, even though it's really, really hurt and been really, really tough some days. I think in the long haul, it's been a good thing.
You'd make for a great job interview. It's a great answer to that question. I'm sold. You got me. Where do I sign? All right, this has been great, Miles. I appreciate your time and sharing some of the wisdom that you've accumulated over the years, and still growing, still pushing. We appreciate that, and sounds like you got a lot of action, which is the biggest thing I think from a sales marketing growth perspective is just moving forward and pushing forward and wanting not wanting to settle, being an entrepreneur at your heart. And definitely, it sounds like that's what you're doing, and we really appreciate the insight and the perspective, and share this with our members. And appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the platform to talk about it. I'm trying to get better at this from an agency owner perspective, and you guys giving us the opportunity to at least talk about Squid a little bit and spread our tentacles is a good thing. So
I think you're ready for the podcast tour. You're ready.
yeah, when you guys are up in Minneapolis, we've got an office set up for you. We'll set up, do the podcast tour when you guys are here.
Sounds good. All right, man. Good talking.
Awesome. Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you.